So here's a tutorial about how to graph data using Excel. I've already plotted my X and Y axis and written up the data table for two separate graphs. So my first graph, I have done an experiment where I pulled a block of wood across carpet and I measured the applied force relative to the weight as I varied the weight from 100 to 700 newtons. Then I repeated the experiment, except for I pulled something that was sandpaper across carpet, and I varied the weight from 150 to 750 newtons. And I want to graph both of those sets of data on one graph in Excel. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to choose my first set of data and highlight it, and then go to Insert, Scatter Plot. And when you do this, you always want to choose a scatter plot that is only markers. You don't want to connect the dots in any way. I'm going to also choose the first chart layout so that I have a title and labels for my axes. And I'll label my title just with the y-axis, applied force, versus the x-axis, weight. When I label my axes, I'm going to give it the title of the applied force, and in brackets I'll include the units, newtons. Same thing for the x-axis. The title is what I'm measuring, the weight, and in brackets I'll include the units. Now to add another set of data to this graph, what I need to do is right-click on the graph area, and I'll choose Select Data. And that gives me the opportunity to add another series of data. So if you choose Add Series, and then you can choose the X values for that series just by clicking right here and highlighting the X column. And then I'll click again on the Y values, highlight the Y column, and select those. And I can also name this series depending on how I ran my experiment. So this one I can call Sandpaper on Carpet. And I could also change Series 1. I can edit it and call it Wood on Carpet. If I want to add a trend line to the data, then I'll select the data that I'm interested in, for example the sandpaper data. I'll right click on the data and choose Add Trend Line. It looks like a linear function, so I'm going to choose linear. I never want to set the intercept to 0. I want to see where the intercept ends up being, but I always want to display the equation on the chart. And I often want to display the r-squared value as well, because that tells me how close the trend line fits the data. When your r-squared value is very close to 1, then the line is a very good fit for the data. So I can see here that my r-squared value is really close to 1, so the trend line is an excellent fit. The slope is about 0.5, and the y-intercept is also around 0.5. To add another trend line, I right-click on the blue data, and I repeat the same procedure. So I display the equation and the r-squared value. And include that labels where you can see that it fits the graph. There we go. So the r-squared value is again very close to 1. Not quite as good as the first trend line. For your legend, you don't need to include a legend about the trend line, so you can select those and delete them. And that would be how to graph the data using Excel. If you want to print this graph, I would select it first, and then you can print just that graph. However, if you've selected the whole chart, then it would print the graph embedded in a paper with the tables. And ideally you want the chart to be really big, so I would print the chart on its own.